On 28 April 1986, monitoring stations in Sweden detected abnormally high levels of wind-borne radioactivity. So they started making investigations. After initial denials, the Soviet Union admitted that a disaster had occurred at their Chernobyl nuclear reactor several days before that they had tried to cover up. Multiple explosions had blown off the protective lid of the concrete and steel nuclear reactor, spewing out levels of radioactivity that far exceeded whatever was created by the atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the radioactivity was carried by the winds as far as France and Italy, endangering the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. Millions of acres of farmland and forests were contaminated, and in the years that followed, livestock was born deformed, and thousands of people succumbed to radiation-caused illnesses and cancers. And the Soviet Union imposed an exclusion zone around Chernobyl that prohibited entry to everybody except for scientists. It covers an area of 4,143 square kilometers. That's like 7 times the size of Singapore. And believe it or not, the exclusion zone exists. It's enforced to this very day, 35 years later. Nuclear energy is the greatest power that mankind has ever harnessed. It is also abundant, cheap, 10 million times more efficient than fossil fuels, does not emit greenhouse gases, and is not weather dependent. But it is also the most destructive force that mankind has ever tinkered with. And the question is, how do you prevent a useful nuclear reaction from spiraling quickly into an uncontrolled nuclear catastrophe? And one way that is done, one of the key methods to prevent that from happening in nuclear reactors is the use of what are called control rods. Okay, control rods that are lowered into the nuclear fuel. To increase output, you raise the nuclear rods, control rods. You raise the rods so that more neutrons collide with other atoms and scatter yet even more neutrons, keeping the chain reaction going. To decrease output, you lower the control rods into the nuclear field so that they absorb some of the neutrons and slow down the reactions. In fact, when all the rods are completely lowered in the nuclear field, it scramps or shuts down the reactor totally. And one of the reasons why the Chernobyl disaster occurred was that they had raised all the control rods, almost all the control rods from the field to conduct some tests, and then when the test went wrong, they could not lower the rods fast enough into the field to scram the reactor. And the results were disastrous, long-term consequences. What's this mini science lesson about? How is it relevant to our message? Today, we're talking about feelings, in particular, the feeling of love. Feelings are powerful and wonderful, but unless their energy is effectively managed, you are going to end up with painful disasters and serious long-term negative consequences. What we need, therefore, is not to dismiss the goodness and the wonder and the importance of feelings, but to put in place control rods so that our feelings work for us, not against us. And today we'll look at a passage of the Bible that gives us some control rods that are necessary for us to manage our feelings. Let's turn together to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 to 7, which says, "Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it is not proud, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres." The Apostle Paul wrote this passage because the church in Corinth was an extraordinarily endowed church. God had blessed them tremendously with spiritual gifts, and the church members exercised their gifts with great enthusiasm and exuberance during their assemblies. You can be sure that going to church in Corinth was never boring. Okay? The emotions ran high because everybody was busy practicing their spiritual gifts. And one gift in particular, speaking in tongues, became the hot favorite. The problem was that in their enthusiasm, in their eagerness to enjoy the wonderful gifts that God had given to them, the Corinthian Christians became showy, they became selfish, and began disrupting their meetings. And that's the reason Paul wrote this famous passage that is read in more weddings than any other Bible passage. Okay, while it's not written in the context of romantic love, there is something that is very relevant to us here. Because he wanted them to understand that if everyone simply did whatever they felt like doing, the good things that God has given to us would end up doing great harm instead. Feelings are like nuclear reactions that must be managed. And based on this passage, I'm going to give you 3 control rods that will enable us to enjoy feelings, the feelings of love without having it blow up in our faces. And the first is this: feelings must be restrained by selflessness. Feelings must be restrained by selflessness. While still a young lawyer, my partner asked me one day if I would like to try my hand at handling a divorce case, and I eagerly accepted, but very soon I regretted it terribly because the dispute was horrendously contentious. The couple were already living in 2 separate houses, rich people already living in 2 separate houses, but between them they only own 1 car. So what they would do, what they would keep doing is in the middle of the night, one person would secretly go to the other person's, to go to the house the other person is staying and steal, okay, steal is the wrong word, take away, drive away the car back to their own house, okay, and they would play this game. And we had to actually go to court to fight over who got to keep that stupid car while the divorce was pending. You know, I remember after one court hearing, the wife, after we came out, the wife asked the husband for some money to take a taxi because that day the husband had taken the car back to his house. So he, well, quite kindly, gave her $20. But then, right then they started a yelling match with each other in the packed courthouse. It was so embarrassing. And then she took the money, threw it on the ground, and stomped off. You know, they fought tooth and nail over every issue. But the worst part was the titanic tussle over their daughter, young girl. And we had already gone to court to settle who gets to have access to the daughter on each day of the week. But even after that, I would keep getting calls almost every week, all kinds of hours, saying that one person or the other person had failed to abide by the timing set out in the court order, and then we would end up back in court with urgent applications to enforce the court order. You know, isn't it strange when you think about it, how 2 lovers can get together because, and often do, get together because they feel so passionately about the other person that this is the most wonderful person out of all the people in the world, and I just cannot be happy without living and making a life together with this person anymore. Can't live anymore if living is without you. But after some years of marriage, what happens? Hey, they end up hating each other with a visceral hatred. Okay, going from the person that they used to love more than anybody else in the world, now they hate that same person with more than anybody else in the world. It becomes, can't go on living anymore if I have to go on living with you. You know? And how does it swing from one extreme to the other? It's because love has 2 elements. People fall in love because they need to meet an emotional void in their lives, right? They need to fill that hole in their life. Nothing wrong with that. We all do that. But there's another important element of love, and that is the need to bless the other person, the need to bring goodness and delight and joy to the object of our love. And problems invariably happen when you don't have both elements in a relationship. Okay, each person must have his or her own need met, but unless that person also gives, the other person is not going to receive anything. And it's worse. Okay, if it's one-sided, it's worse. It's bad. It's worse if both parties focus only on getting their own needs met without also giving to the other person. That's a sure recipe for failure. And what makes it so difficult is that our culture increasingly emphasizes self-fulfillment and self-expression. It tells us to slavishly follow our feelings. So as long as we feel love for each other, great, let's carry on. But when the feelings are gone, the moment the feelings are gone, it leaves no basis for any relationship anymore. Now, instead of this very self-centered view of love, let's go back to what Paul said in verses 4 to 5. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. What is common to all these things that's been said about love? Well, every single one of them is about benefiting the other person, not looking after your own interests. Being patient means you accommodate the other person's schedule and weaknesses. Now, being kind means you extend goodness to the other person. Being envious means you rejoice in the other person's success. Not boasting, not being proud means you take the spotlight off yourself. And then comes all the negative things that love will not do, will not engage in. You won't dishonor, you won't seek your own good, you won't give up easily, and you never bear a grudge or dig up the past even when the other person wrongs you. It is all about the other person, not about yourself. That's really difficult. Selflessness does not come naturally or easily to any of us. But unless with the control rod of selflessness in our relationships, in our marriages, it is not going to last. It is not going to thrive. In fact, it is selflessness, that keeps the feelings strong and alive. So if all you want is that loving feeling, you're going to lose it sooner or later. But if what you focus on is selflessly giving yourself to the other person, then you will get to have that loving feeling as well. And that's why the greatest love stories are not just about romance, but about self-sacrifice. Last week, I spoke about the Titanic movie, and we know a large part of the story is about the whirlwind romance of Jack and Rose as they cavort around the ship. But what finally takes the story to a whole new, different level is when Jack sacrifices himself at the end, giving up the tiny space on the raft for Rose while he sunk down into the cold, watery depths. Now, when we watch that movie, we know that it's just a story. It's made up. And yet, watching scenes like this stir up something deep within us, don't they? Because they remind us of what we often forget, but what we already know and sense deep down inside. That ultimate love is not a feeling, but total self-giving. And Jesus taught this to his disciples, who often squabbled and jostled with each other for the best position, for personal benefit. In John chapter 15, verse 12, Jesus said, "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down his life for his friends." To lay down one's life for one's friends. Now, not many of us will be called to literally die for someone else. But the same underlying principle of selflessness applies to all relationships, especially romantic love. Is especially crucial in romantic love. So, practically, if you are a guy, come on guys, don't pressure or manipulate your girlfriend to engage in sex, even though that's what your feelings are driving you towards. If you're a lady, don't keep complaining that your boyfriend is not giving you enough time or attention just because you need that to feel more secure. If you are married, serve and honor your spouse, especially in those times when you least feel like doing it. If you're parents, don't leave it to your spouse to bear the bulk of the burden for taking care of the child just because you feel so tired, or you want the freedom to go and do something else. If you are in a cell group, and every one of you is, choose to attend and to contribute meaningfully when you go, even if that's the last thing you feel like doing after a difficult week at work. Because love is not just about the way you feel, it's about making the decision to live and act selflessly. Feelings are powerful, feelings are wonderful, but they must be restrained by the control rod of selflessness. Number 2, feelings must be guided by truth. Yeah, that's the second control rod. Feelings must be guided by truth. Last year, the Straits Times reported a bizarre story of a Singaporean woman who was discovered by her husband to have engaged in an extramarital affair, and she had become pregnant with her boyfriend's baby. One day, when she learned that her husband was going on a road trip with their 2 children and his parents, she instructed her lover to go and sabotage her husband's car by loosening the wheel nuts and damaging the brakes. Complying with the woman's instructions, that guy, the lover, foolishly covered his face with a jacket. And I was thinking that this happened just before the requirement to wear masks came about, was issued. Otherwise, he might possibly have gotten away with it. But this was just before that was required. So he went to the car park, he covered his face with a jacket, and a stranger saw that. So his covered up face became very suspicious and called the police. And this guy was arrested on the scene, and they found evidence of the conspiracy in his phone, in the text messages between the 2 of them, and even a photograph of the damaged bricks that he had proudly sent to the woman he loves. And in his own defense, in his own justification, he said he was trying to prove his love to her and to make her happy. You know, it's chilling, isn't it? To contemplate that this woman had hoped to kill her husband, her children, and her in-laws so that she could start a new life with her lover. Which I think is not too bright anyway. This guy, I think he didn't grow up watching Animal Planet. He didn't know of the female black widow spider or the female praying mantis that killed and ate his partner after mating. Okay? That he'll be next one in line. You know, love can and does make people do all kinds of bizarre and wrongful things. Most of us here would not kill for love. I would like to believe that, right? But, you know, the feelings associated with love are so compelling and so self-justifying that it is easy for any one of us in love to also compromise our moral principles, all in the name of love. And that's why Paul wrote in verse 6, love does not delight in evil but rejoices in the truth. What's interesting is that according to this verse, the opposite of evil is not stated as good but as truth. Why? Because truth is not just a description of physical reality, but of moral and spiritual reality as well. You can't go through life defying physical realities, like walking off the top of a tall building. Neither can you defy moral and spiritual realities and hope that there would be no serious consequences. The danger with love, feelings of love, is that it makes us think that we can ignore truth and get away with it. I mean, when you're attracted to a person who is not your spouse, it is easy to justify to yourself that your spouse has been neglecting you, your spouse really doesn't understand you like this person does, that you deserve to be happy. And then, those of us who are Christians, we know how when you are in love, you find yourself tempted to throw out all the biblical rules on sex. Because feelings make it easy for us to ignore truth. Since I'm already on this topic, I might as well deal with a thorny issue. Christians and non-Christians marrying each other. Now, as you know, I'm all for people getting hitched, right? The government, in fact, I think should pay me for so strongly advocating marriage. But churches have always objected to Christians and non-Christians tying the knot. Why? Now, I assure you, this is not because we enjoy controlling people. You may think that this is just about your personal beliefs, so two different persons coming together, two different faiths, well, you just have to live and let live, agree to disagree. Let me explain to you why this is such a bad idea. When you become Christian, what actually happens. I mean, when you actually become Christian, you don't really think of it that way because you're a noob, right? A new Christian. But when you become Christian, what really happens is you have discovered and adopted an entirely different view of ultimate reality. You step into a whole new world. Or rather, the blinkers come off and you see the world as it really is. You begin to appreciate for the first time what ultimate reality is. So you throw out all your old ideas and take on a radically different understanding of what life is all about. Okay, the most fundamental and important and critical aspects of life, the origin and the creator of the universe, the existence and the nature of the supernatural, the purpose of human existence, the basis for right and wrong, and the destiny of the entire human race. For a believer and unbeliever to marry each other would mean putting together two persons with wholly incompatible conceptions of ultimate reality. Marriage is hard work enough all by itself. Having two persons who hold fundamentally different views and values makes it infinitely more challenging. I mean, yes, if they are two mature, collaborative individuals, they may be able to coexist, perhaps even for life, but they would never achieve the kind of whole person intimacy, soul, body, soul, spirit, that God intends for marriage. So, let's be practical. Let me say that if you are an unbeliever listening to this, you're an unbeliever married to a believer, I urge you to seriously think about exploring your spouse's faith. Because if Christianity is true, then it would be good not only for you. Okay, sharing your spouse's faith would also greatly enhance your marriage as well. If you are a believer, already married to an unbeliever, the Bible is very practical about it. Also, it says, stay married. Don't get out of the marriage. Stay married and sanctify your spouse. Meaning, keep lovingly pointing them towards Jesus, towards God, and don't give up trying. If you are non-Christian, dating a Christian, you need to understand that you are asking the Christian to give up or compromise a relationship, a commitment that is more profound and important than any human marriage, just to be with you. And people cannot do something like that without serious damage to their souls. If you love someone, why would you want to make the other person go through that, even if he or she is willing to do it? Now, I know by now, all of us listening to this, we find this topic very awkward, okay? Especially if you have a friend who's unbeliever listening to this. And why do we feel so awkward about this? Because our culture has taught us to make feelings the highest value in a relationship. If you are in love, you should have every right to follow your heart. No one should judge you for it. No one should come in between to intervene between you. That's our conception of love. But listen to what the Bible says about love in 1 John chapter 5, verse 3, which says, in fact, actually, this is love for God, to keep His commandments, and His commandments are not burdensome. Genuine love does not find the restrictions imposed by truth burdensome. Or as Paul says, love rejoices with the truth. Feelings are powerful. Feelings are wonderful. And precisely because of that, they must be regulated by the control rod of selflessness and guided by the control rod of truth. Number 3, feelings must be subordinated to commitment. An awful word in this day and age. Commitment. When people are not quite ready to enter into a contract, they're negotiating, they're almost there, but they still have some doubts or reservations, they sometimes sign what is called a Memorandum of Understanding, okay, an MOU. Okay, to make it clear that we are not quite there yet. No, we have not actually made any legal commitment to each other. It has become fashionable to write your own marriage vows. That's not a bad thing, nothing wrong with that. It helps you to own them more personally. But these days, sometimes, the vows get so watered down, they are more like MOUs than VOWs. Yeah? For example, in the past, people used to pledge their love to each other till death do us part. Okay, it's lifelong commitment. Now, it's become popular to say instead that we pledge ourselves to each other so long as our love shall last. So long as our love shall last, which is basically doesn't mean anything at all, right? But this is the modern idea of love, that it is primarily a feeling and it's a prerequisite to commitment. Okay, that love, the feelings must come first, and then you can have commitment. And it is better to go your separate ways than to stick together when the flames of passion have fizzled out. It is also why people choose to cohabit rather than get married, because they anticipate that the feelings will eventually go away. The feelings they have for each other would not last, and when that time comes, it will come. It's practically easier to move on, go our separate ways without the legal entanglements. Contrast all that with 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 7, which says, it, meaning love, always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. In other words, love is total commitment. Love is permanent dedication. Love is non-negotiable allegiance. Love is unyielding loyalty. Love believes and never gives up believing. Love is a decision of the will to stick to the other person and do what is in his or her best interest, no matter what happens, no matter how long it lasts, no matter what it costs, no matter how hard it gets. Love keeps on keeping on and sticking on. Love never gives up. Can you say amen to that? Not many of you believe in true love. Come on, can you say amen to that? Amen. Okay, in case you're wondering, you cannot sing, you can say amen. Now, can you practice that kind of commitment without being a Christian? Well, perhaps, but the advantage that those of us who are Christians have is that we understand that we ourselves have been loved with that kind of commitment, and this is beautifully illustrated in the story, in the life of the prophet Hosea, who had the most bizarre calling of all the Old Testament prophets, because God told him to go and marry a woman knowing that she would be unfaithful to him and break his heart. And sure enough, he married her, and she led him to engage in many adulterous relationships and prostitution. And then, in Hosea chapter 3, verse 1, the Lord said to Hosea, go show your love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes. So Hosea brought his wife back at great cost and restored the relationship. And as God already explained, he was using this marriage to illustrate his relationship with his people Israel. Despite his love for them, they had been unfaithful to him, committing spiritual adultery by going after false gods. And God wanted to know that in spite of all that, he still loved them with an unyielding love, and he was still ready to welcome them back into his loving arms. And this is not just for the Israelites, it is for all of us. We have all turned our backs on God, who loved us, and gone to worship other gods. But God, in his love, continues to be committed to us, and he paid a far greater cost for us to return to him the sacrifice of his Son, Jesus Christ. Knowing that we've experienced such committed love, though we deserve the very opposite, we now find the power and the motivation to give that kind of committed love to other people as well. 2 years ago, my wife and I went on a safari in Africa. It was a costly exercise, but we thought that it was worth it to celebrate 25 years of marriage. When our tiny plane landed on a jungle airstrip, we met there three American-born Chinese in their late 30s. When they found out that we were from Singapore, the first thing they said was, "You are the crazy rich Asians." I said, "No, we are not rich, just crazy." And anyway, over the next few days, we hit it off really well. And they came to say to us that they wished that they could take us along with them on the rest of their trip. They felt sad that we'd be parting ways because they really wanted something they saw in us. And they asked us, how? How could it be possible? Okay, these are Americans, understand. How could it be possible for two persons to be married 25 years and still love each other like you guys do? And then they each told me their individual stories. Okay, so I went on this trip and did marriage counseling, premarital counseling. The first one said he had decided, he's a script writer for TV shows. He said he had decided never to get married because every one of his family members and all his relatives were divorced several times, and he didn't want to go through any of that. So although there was this girl that was all ready to marry him, no, he didn't want to get into any relationship. Another one, the second one, shared that, okay, this guy is kind of dysfunctional. Okay, he shared that he's like maybe nearly 40. He shared that he was living with a medical student, okay, very young girl, but he really wanted to marry his high school classmate instead. He was afraid. He told me he was afraid that he left the medical student and pursued the classmate. She might reject him, in which case he'll be left with nothing. Okay, neither one. So he asked me, "What do you think if I kept cohabiting with this young girl and I tried to get into a relationship with my classmate?" I told him, "I would think you're a jerk." The third guy was an entrepreneur who had just sold off his business, and he had paid for this trip for his two other good friends to come on the trip because now he had so much money. And he said he had been engaged for over 2 years already. And he explained that the long wait was because his lawyers, he instructed his lawyers, and they had prepared a prenuptial agreement and sent it to his fiancée, but the fiancée had not agreed to the terms yet. He even told me proudly that in the prenup, he had offered to give 70% of his substantial wealth should they one day divorce. And he said that he wanted to give her, he did that because he wanted to give her a sense of security, and that's why he was being so generous. I almost laughed when he said that. I could stop myself from laughing when he said that. I said, "Oh yes, you are being generous, but the very fact that you want her to sign a prenup means that you're not giving her any sense of security." And so I explained to these three guys that the real security in our marriage was that we had made a permanent, irrevocable commitment to each other for better or for worse till death do us part. No prenuptial agreement, no escape clauses. And that's why it works. It was really interesting observing their very conflicted response. These three young men, not so young men. They recoiled from what I said because such commitment is repugnant to their cultural upbringing. I think in the US, like 60% of marriages end up in divorces. And yet, deep down inside, I could see that they wanted so badly. They didn't know how it could be done, but they wanted it to be possible. They wanted what we have. They wanted something far better than the obviously failed model that their culture had prescribed, that love can only last so long as the feeling lasts. I just want to say to all of you, for those of you who are married or contemplating marriage, you have to choose what you will build your marriage on. Will it be the shifting sense of feelings that our culture advocates, or will it be the solid bedrock that the Bible prescribes? I mean, don't get me wrong, commitment doesn't mean you merely endure and put up with each other, like many of our parents do, for the next 30 years in an emotionally divorced marriage. It means Wherever you are now, it means diligently working out the issues that have caused you to drift apart or fall out, and to keep on investing time, energy, and resources into the marriage to keep it healthy and satisfying. Those of you who have had the tragic experience of growing up with divorced parents, oh, come on, don't you just wish with all your heart that your parents had chosen to let their feelings follow the commitment rather than commitment follow feelings? Don't you just wish so badly, even though now you're all grown up, you still wish so badly that your parents had stuck to each other and tried harder to make things work rather than just give up because they didn't feel like it anymore? And now, shouldn't all of us want the best for our children, and not just for our children, for ourselves, and above all, if you are believers, for the glory of God? Feelings, powerful, feelings are wonderful, but they must be restrained by the control rod of selflessness, guided by the control rod of truth, and subordinated to the control rod of commitment. Let's ask the Lord to come and give us strength.